So we had a chance to go see the dress rehearsal of the performance of an Iliad at the Oriental Institute last night.
How was it?
It was amazing. Amazing. Absolutely amazing.
I'm going to go in March, so I'm looking forward to it. Oh, wow. Yes.
Are you going to see it at the OI?
Yes.
Oh, you're going to love it. That's all we'll say, though.
Yes, I've heard really good things about it. And yeah, it's a solo performance. And yes, I've heard it's brilliant. Very good. That's great. All right. Okay, so it seems like we have 9 participants. And all right, so we should start. Okay, so we were in book 2 and we were reading Glaucon's speech, and we started off with a question, or Glaucon's dissatisfaction with the praises of justice that Socrates has given so far. So he's expressing his dissatisfaction and his desire to learn something. He wants to get something out of Socrates, and we don't know what that is yet, but what we do know, that he's very dissatisfied with the praises of justice. And he's also, he's testing Socrates, and so he restored Thrasymachus's arguments, right? And he actually quotes the famous tale of the Gyges, right? That comes from Herodotus. And that's what we were discussing, the significance of this story. Why does Glaucon bring this up at all? What kind of a model does Gyges represent? Why go at such length to talk about this story and, its relationship to the notion of justice, right? And so, yeah, we kind of stopped or ended at the question that why Glaucon gives Gyges such prominence as the central and most vivid figure in his speech, especially the third part of his speech. So, I'm sorry?
Good.
Oh, okay. So we talked, okay. All right, so we were discussing then how Gyges actually represents a model just man, right? And who was Gyges? He was a murderer, a seducer, and a usurper. And if we are in the right frame of mind, we would say, oh, that doesn't sound just. It sounds very unjust and bad and wrong. And how can this be a model of a just man, right? But this is what Glaucon thinks. And so he references this tale, this story. And Mary had brought up this point about that there's something about nature. Mary, do you recall?
Do I recall?
Yes, no. It was you. You brought
no recollection whatsoever. What did I say? Was it brilliant?
Well, I remember it. And you said, it seems like there's something to do with human nature. I think those were your words. It's on the recording, so you can go back and listen to it. Okay. So I think that's really important, especially when we contrast Glaucon and Adeimantus later today. So nature is really important. And well, if not Mary, then somebody else. Why do you think that's important for Glaucon? Why is nature playing a role? Yes, Scott.
Oh, nature. Well, nature in terms of an individual's nature.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I thought maybe it's kind of, if one seemingly just but unjust they get the benefits of approval from society for being just, even though they're not, and they get the benefits of being unjust because they're able to do things that they shouldn't, but are not caught, or they get away with it. And there's a nature. It is kind of like power corrupts. Power absolutely corrupts. Kind of like you've got this power, and you can use it, unbridled power, and you not only are able to use the power and get away with the actions that provide benefits, but also you don't even receive disapproval from the community, which is another form of kind of punishment. And so you're kind of like, according to this story, get the best of both worlds. And the only way you wouldn't consider it to be the best of both worlds is if internally you receive some sort of benefit for being just that goes beyond those extrinsic benefits, if that makes sense. That's my thought on it anyway.
What is happening in Gaiji's? Like, because what is, Glaucon is expressing a certain fear, right? He's expressing, yes, Mary Jo.
Yeah, he says that this is great proof that no one is willingly just, but only when compelled to be so. It reminded me of a place early on in book 1 when they asked, let's see, who was it? Cephalus, what the greatest good he enjoyed from possessing great wealth. And he said, it contributes a great deal to not cheating or lying, to not departing for that place, right? Because you owe someone money. But the temptation is too great. And that there is no just or unjust person with that ultimate power.
Right. So everyone, yes, Jonathan.
Well, and I apologize about missing the last 2 weeks. But to your question about nature, Gaiji's gets the ring because of a thunderstorm and an earthquake, almost as if he's getting teed up. Nature's giving him something to force his then human moral judgment upon. It's thrusting him in. It's almost like saying the gods kind of set this up for you without saying the gods set this up. And then it's up to him, because he's been dealt that hand by nature, to choose what to do with it. And I think the way Glaucon tells it, he kind of does what you'd expect him to do. He uses it to get away with stuff.
Yeah.
And so I found, I'm not certain I have a point there, other than I think that it's interesting that nature tees up to, at some level, have Gaiji's do what his nature tells him to do, sort of figuratively and literally. And how does that then, how does the society judge whether that's just or not? I'm confused. So anyway, that was my point.
That's good. So the reason why Glaucon is bringing this up is to express his suspicion of human nature, that even a just man, when given an opportunity, has this secret yearning. He has secret yearning to murder. He has these erotic passions, and he has this desire to attain power, right? He's saying it is in human nature to do all of these things. So if an opportunity is presented to you, like it was presented to Gaiji's, he did all of these things. He murdered the king, he seduced the queen, and he assumed power, right? And so that is his suspicion. So he's saying even a very just man actually has a dark side, right? And if opportunity presents itself, can become really unjust, can become ruthless, can be a rapist, can be a murderer, So that is his suspicion. He doesn't trust nature there, right? Which I think is interesting. So he's making his central argument then hinges on what nature is, human nature, and also law, right? It's both nature and law together that can give in to treachery and tyranny, if in the hands of an unjust man. Yes. So in section 360B, I think that's where we left off. We read through this passage that starts with, now, if there were two such rings. And I think there are some very important points that we didn't really get to. And there is some cynicism that Glaucon is expressing about Greek society that we should, have a handle on, we should tackle. So I can start it off. And so I'll read. Now, if there were two such rings, and the just man would put one on, and the unjust man the other, no one, as it would seem, would be so adamant as to stick by justice and bring himself to keep away from what belongs to others and not lay hold of it. Although he had license to take what he wanted from the market without fear, and to go into houses and have intercourse with whomever he wanted, and to slay or release from bonds whomever he wanted, and to do other things as an equal to a god among humans. Key notion, key moment here. He's treating that man as an equal to a god among humans. So we should decipher that. And in so doing, one would act no differently from the other, but both would go the same way. And yet someone could say that this is a great proof that no one is willingly just, but only when compelled to be so. Men do not take it to be a good for them in private, since wherever each supposes he can do injustice, he does it. Indeed, all men suppose injustice is far more to their private profit than justice. And what they suppose is true, as the man who makes this kind of an argument will say, since if a man were to get hold of such license and were never willing to do any injustice and didn't lay his hands on what belongs to others, he would seem most wretched to those who were aware of it, and most foolish too, although they would praise him to each other's faces, deceiving each other for fear of suffering injustice. So much for that. So there is quite a bit going on, and in the framework that we have set up for ourselves about Greek Enlightenment, the Sophist Enlightenment, the dissatisfaction with what there is, seeking for something new. And, in this phrase really struck me here when he likens this man who's like Gyges as an equal to a god among humans, because he can do whatever he wants. He can, but it's not the good deeds. Who is this man equal to the gods? Yes, Laura.
Well, I mean, all I can think of is it's the gods of Homer and such, the gods that kind of do wrong and right, that do good and bad or whatever. Yeah. That would be why it's considered an equal to gods, the gods in their understanding of what the gods could do were not always just. That definition.
Yes, that's exactly right. And so those gods, what Glaucon is saying, were like Gyges, or Gyges is like those gods who are seducers, who are usurpers, who are murderers. And so Glaucon is saying, I don't want those gods. And so there's a lot of cynicism that he's expressing about religion, that he's expressing about the existing gods or the Homeric gods, And so, and hence, going back to where the Republic began with the introduction of a new goddess, right? They're looking for something new, right? They're looking for something different, right? And Socrates therefore has a crucial role to play, right? And so it's really important. It's like, again, seeking some kind of a departure from what Glaucon has been told, has observed, has learned, right? The education he has received from his teachers. He's very cynical about that. Mary Jo, you seem very thoughtful. He's puzzling over something.
No, I agree with Laura. I was just thinking that these, I'm not going to lose my thought. So Laura was saying that I was thinking the gods meddling. The gods are meddling in people's lives too, which I guess is, like the murder, seduction, and taking power, but there's kind of this power to go, wreak havoc with people's lives too, that doesn't seem right, which a leader could do too with that ultimate power. Random wreaking havoc.
Right. Yes, Jonathan.
Yeah, and to build on that, it's interesting. It's almost like he's setting up that, by his definition, the overriding human inclination, which makes them godlike, is self-interest. And that then he's setting it up that being just might require some type of denial or limiting of that self-interest. Because he says, if left to your own pursuits, you're going to do whatever the hell is the best for you, irrespective of whether it's just or unjust. If it's good for me, I'm going to go do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then that sets up this conversation about then just and injustice being some type of tempering of that self-interest.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's going to set up a question later on. I've read ahead, is that it begs the question then, is being just somehow denial of that self-interest versus giving it free rein?
Mm-hmm. Laura.
I think it also justifies their way of believing you can be unjust and just if they think the gods are both of those things. So it's a model.
Mm-hmm.
And if they look at the gods as a model and the gods are expected to be this way, then they have no reason to not be that way either. And so I think the whole premise has to change in order to change their premise of their belief of what a god is, which we see in further on. But
that's right. Yes, Mary.
What's interesting about this, I think maybe it was last year we read the Apology, and it was hard to tease out from that precisely what it was that Socrates was doing that seemed sufficient to be executed by the state. But in this book, it's clarified, right? Because he's not just talking about justice, but he's casting doubt on the gods. And not only that, he's casting doubt on the entire underlying structure, as I understand it, of incantations and sacrifices and all of these things that as a community that you do to bring the gods in on your side. And so now I'm thinking, well, maybe he did, cause impiety among the young men. Maybe, I mean, not that execution is appropriate, but you see some of the validity of possibly of the charges.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. Yes, Scott.
Just briefly, though, I also, to that point, Mary, as this unfolds, he's leaning more and more towards Sparta and less towards Athens. And so, is he a Spartan or is he an Athenian? And I think that's got to be some of his undoing too.
So can you, Scott, say more about this distinction between Sparta and Athens? Like what?
Well, I'll be honest. I started this book from scratch with everybody, but I wasn't sure we were supposed to read to, so I don't know if I'm going to make a comment that's outside of where we are.
Mm-hmm.
But to the extent that he structures this community, and it starts in this book as an argument for determining what is just, the community he constructs is totalitarian, at least in my opinion, from what I read. And it sounds very much like Sparta was structured, where there is a guardian class and everybody vies to be in the guardian class and they're put through a bunch of tests. This is Sparta, to see whether, they can be in the guardian class. And if they're not in the guardian class and they are workers, unless they happen to be that one very lucky king, and they are highly restricted. They're censored because they have to filter all their messages to reinforce the military state. They economically are sharing property. Children are wards of the state. Their education is highly structured to reinforce these societal bounds. Medical care is given to those that deserve medical care, which are those that don't need medical care, and others are left to die if they've been slothful, and that's the reason for their illness. Then they don't fit into this guardian structure, and then there's even a eugenics aspect to it. So as I read through this, I was almost shocked in a sense. This came from Socrates as an argument, and obviously as an argument of the times, but also shocked thinking through what in my mind was the Athenian culture versus the Spartan culture. They'd just gone through a war with Sparta, and they had apparently lost that war.
They did.
Socrates arguing for a state that looks like what he fought.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. So there's always this tension between Spartan oligarchy and Athenian democracy. And so so the Republic, of course, presents a turning point in the history of Athens, right? And it's a crisis that Plato's Socrates is actually referencing, right? That's their Athenian values are in question, right? They in order to preserve them, one has to do something more, right? And so therefore there is an interrogation of their values that came into being through the mythic authority of Homer, right? And now they're saying, well, or Plato's saying, I think we cannot go back to that, right? We need something different. And maybe, yeah, that is probably close to what Sparta was, Mary Jo.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting you pointed out that Glaucon is questioning. And I didn't really recognize that before. So it's Plato just showing, Socrates is helping something along that's already going on. But in Scott's use of the word censorship, it may be that they would prefer to censor those kind of questions, which Socrates is not, he's not helping that censorship and egging on people that question like that.
Right. And as what Mary, you were pointing out about Socrates' the reason for his own death on the charge of impiety, I think is significant. It does show a turning point, in the history of Athens when, you cannot just say anything against the gods, right? You cannot say anything against religion, right? And I think that was, I think it was a very startling charge against a philosopher, and therefore in the Republic, there is this quest to find out a new role, to carve out a new role for philosophy, right? Therefore, Socrates has these insinuations, and there are these points when he's saying, okay, what is the use of philosophy? How can philosophy be free so that we can live a good life? Like philosophy has to be free, for the city to live a good life. Philosophers have to be free to actually then educate the youth on leading a good life, a just life, a beautiful life, right? So he's going to come back to that point that he discussed in book 1 in different ways. So yes, so there is a questioning that's going on of their existing values, right? Of their existing ethics, of their existing religion, their existing gods, and they're questioning their masters, because they're going to talk about Hesiod and Homer, right? They're going to talk about the poets, right? So, and that's why, Plato is known for his critique of poetry, or how he hated poetry, right? He's expressing his dissatisfaction with his ancestors. Okay, so who would like to read further from 360E as to the judgment itself? Oh, yes, Kate. Thank you.
As to the judgment itself about the life of these two of whom we are speaking, we'll be able to make it correctly if we set the most just man and the most unjust in opposition. If we do not, we won't be able to do so. What then is this opposition? It is as follows. We shall take away nothing from the injustice of the unjust man, nor from the justice of the just man, but we shall take each as perfect in his own pursuit. So first, let the unjust man act like the clever craftsman. An outstanding pilot or doctor is aware of the difference between what is impossible in his art and what is possible, and he attempts the one and lets the other go. And if, after all, he should still trip up in any way, he is competent to set himself aright. Similarly, let the unjust man also attempt unjust deeds correctly and get away with them if he is going to be extremely unjust. The man who is caught must be considered a poor chap, for the extreme of injustice is to seem to be just when one is not. So the perfectly unjust man must be given the most perfect injustice, and nothing must be taken away. He must be allowed to do the greatest injustice while having provided himself with the greatest reputation for justice. And if, after all, he should trip up in anything, he has the power to set himself aright. If any of his unjust deeds should come to light, he is capable both of speaking persuasively and of using force to the extent that force is needed, since he is courageous and strong, and since he has provided for friends and money. Now, let us set him down as such, and put beside him in the argument the just man in his turn, a man simple and noble, who, according to Aeschylus, does not wish to seem, but rather to be good. The seeming must be taken away. For if he should seem just, there would be honors and gifts for him for seeming to be such. Then it wouldn't be plain whether he is such for the sake of the just or for the sake of the gifts and honors. So he must be stripped of everything except justice, and his situation must be made the opposite of the first man's. Doing no injustice, let him have the greatest reputation for injustice, so that his justice may be put to the test to see if it is softened by bad reputation and its consequences. Let him go unchanged till death, seeming throughout life to be unjust, although he is just, so that when each has come to the extreme, the one of justice, the other of injustice, they can be judged as to which of the two is happier.
Good. Okay, let's pause here. So what is going on with the reputation of being just while you are unjust, the reputation of being unjust while you are just? What is Glaucon on about with this appearance of being just while actually you're not? Scott.
I think it's easier to see what the just person is feeling when they're thought to be unjust, in that essentially they're being punished for doing something just. So why would they be just and still continue to be punished? And the only reason they would is if there's some intrinsic value of being just. Mm-hmm. I think that's the point of this, is that, you know, is there only an external benefit for being just or unjust? Is there external benefit plus an internal benefit? Or my Siri just started talking to me. but anyway, so that's
about justice.
Yeah. But yeah, so that's kind of my thought.
Oh, Mary Jo.
Yeah, following up on that kind of internal, I mean, the last sentence or phrase is, who's happier? So is there, and what is happiness in this culture? Is it like your whole life? We go way back to, is it are you happy or did you live a good life? If your grandchildren did well,
Yes.
But so I don't know what they mean by happy, but is it for us? It would be kind of an internal comfort of knowledge of that you're doing the right thing, even though you're not getting any credit for it.
Right. Yes, Laureen.
Not only are you not getting any credit, you may be despised, but the unjust man has all these friends because he buys them things and takes care of them. So it's got to be very intrinsic because it's pretty miserable. And I wouldn't think very happy to be without friends and to be thought of as wretched.
Yes, Laura.
And we have a bit of an example, although we don't really know because he's very wealthy, but Cephalus was considered, he was fine to die. He had peace and fair.
Yeah.
He felt he dealt fairly. And so we kind of have a view of what might be happy in an intrinsic way, as well as, of course, he had the extrinsic because he was so wealthy, but it might be a glimpse of what that aspect.
That's where he's going, I think. Cephalus is sort of on his mind, and he's in the background, as a person who is going to make sacrifices, right? Who's going to offer sacrifices to the gods so that he can earn rewards in Hades, right? So really the question is, who is going to get the rewards? Earthly rewards, heavenly rewards. Is it the just man? Is it the unjust man? How is he going to benefit himself? And then how is he going to benefit the community? Who is most effective? So it also is going to build on the argument that is coming up, is to build a best city, right? The best city is built by a just man or an unjust man. That's what Glaucon is wondering about, right? And so he is going in this convoluted way to really arrive at a conclusion. Who is it? Are we better off in tyranny or are we better off in democracy? They don't know, or he doesn't know, right? Because in his view, democracy also hasn't worked. Right? It gave into tyranny, right? But then he's wondering, okay, is tyranny good? Well, Thrasymachus said it is good, right? And Thrasymachus is his teacher. And who said, well, you can achieve happiness under tyranny. And so Glaucon is also saying, look, this is what I have been taught. This is my education. So Socrates, am I right? And so what he's doing is that he's compelling Socrates to act, and Socrates is not taking any action yet, right? He's not coming forth with his plan. Yes? Okay, so well, let's carry on. This is good. Laureen, may I ask you, is that okay? Oh, you kind of took off your glasses, sorry.
I know, I read about them, yeah. So, sorry, we were at my?
Yes.
My, I said, my dear Glaucon, how vigorously you polish up each of the two men, just like a statue, for their judgment. As much as I can, he said. With two such men, it's no longer hard, I suppose, to complete the speech by a description of the kind of life that awaits each. It must be told then. And if it's somewhat rustically told, don't suppose that it is I who speak, Socrates, but rather those who praise injustice ahead of justice. They'll say that the just man who has such a disposition will be whipped, he'll be racked, he'll be bound, he'll have both his eyes burned out, and at the end, when he has undergone every sort of evil, he'll be crucified and know that one shouldn't wish to be, but to seem to be just. After all, Aeschylus's saying applies far more correctly to the unjust man. For really, they will say, it is the unjust man, because he pursues a thing dependent on truth and does not live in the light of opinion, who does not wish to seem unjust, but to be unjust, reaping a deep furrow in his mind from which trusty plans bear fruit. First, he rules in the city because he seems to be just. Then he takes in marriage from whatever station he wants and gives in marriage to whomever he wants. He contracts and has partnerships with whomever he wants. And besides benefiting himself in all this, he gains because he has no qualms about doing injustice. So then, when he enters contests, both private and public, he wins to get the better of his enemy. In getting the better, he is wealthy and does good to friends and harm to enemies. For the gods, he makes sacrifices and sets up votive offerings, adequate and magnificent, and cares for the gods and those human beings he wants to care for far better than the just man. So in all likelihood, it is also more appropriate for him to be dearer to the gods than is the just man. Thus, they say, Socrates, with gods and with humans, a better life is provided for the unjust man than for the just man.
Good, thank you, thanks. Okay, so now he is explaining his point, but before we go to Glaucon, what did you think of Socrates' comment when he said, my, how vigorously you polish up each of the two men, just like a statue for their judgment?
Well, maybe that, I mean, oh, sorry, someone, that he, he's using these absolutes and that in reality, not more complicated than that.
Yes, Scott, and then Kate.
I was thinking at this point, he hasn't really said a whole lot about the just man. And maybe Socrates is kind of being sarcastic in the sense that he hasn't really given a good argument for why a just man would be just, but he has given an argument why an unjust man might be benefited by being unjust.
Yes, that's right. Kit, you were...
Yeah, I think this is similar to what Lorraine was saying, that he's setting these two almost ideals, the ideal just man and the ideal unjust man, unchanging, set in stone, literally set in stone as a statue.
Jonathan.
Yeah, he's attacking maybe sophistry. Right? So
yes.
we'll eloquently argue these wonderful absolutes to Kit's point, these two invented things, and then make a distinction between it, when the reality, I think to Lorraine's point too, is that it's going to be more nuanced and real than that.
Right. You just cannot, you cannot measure the two by the same yardstick, which Glaucon seemed to be doing. He's trafficking in some kind of ambiguity about just and unjust characteristics of men. Okay. Yes, so the unjust man makes sacrifices to the gods and cares for the gods. So what is Glaucon saying with that? Yes, Laura.
That the gods will be closer to the unjust man than the just man. And the reason the unjust man is doing this is because he knows he's unjust and he's trying to make positive results when he dies. So the gods like him better because they get all kinds of attention from the unjust.
Right, he can absolve himself, right, of all the wrongdoings that he has done because he makes offerings to the gods. The gods are happy. And so, yes, Mary Jo, were you raising your hand? Oh, okay. So again, this is some kind of an indictment, of the Greek gods, Greek religion, Greek enlightenment. He's like, well, that's how it is. Like, so this is what Cephalus is doing. This is what my dad is doing right now. He's outside. He left this meeting, and he's making offerings to the gods so that he can find peace in Hades and he can be rewarded in Hades, right? So that he's not buried in mud and is not allowed to, or is not asked to carry water in a sieve, right? Those were the punishments. that were given in Hades. So he's like, well, it seems like an unjust man can buy justice or his way into what is heavenly or good. If you're wealthy, like, yes, Laura.
So it's really, Glaucon really believes though that this is, I mean, am I right in that Glaucon thinks that's the way it goes and should go or whatever. And it's Plato who's saying to us, this is an indictment on the Greek gods. Like, is that correct?
That's right, exactly. So he's representing, the way he's representing Glaucon is to show the decay of Greek values and the Greek gods. That's right. And so Plato is, of course, after something else, like a new religion. And that's what Plato Socrates is tasked with. Okay, well, so he's interrupted by his brother Adeimantus, and that's interesting. So what is interesting to keep in mind is, so we talked about the importance of nature in Glaucon's speech, and the significance that he attributes to nature there, and through the invocation of this myth or story of the Gyges. Adeimantus is going to take a different tack, right? And it is not through nature. So we should pay attention to what he's going to do. And what is his dissatisfaction? And is he similar to Glaucon in that? Or is he striving for something different? Okay, may I ask Jonathan? Jonathan, would you like to read? In D, 362D?
362D. So when Glaucon had said this, I had it in mind to say something to it, but his brother Adeimantus said in his turn, "You surely don't believe, Socrates, that the argument has been adequately stated." "Why not?" I said. "What most needed to be said has not been said," he said. Then I said, "As the saying goes, let a man stand by his brother. So you too, if he leaves out anything, come to his defense." And yet, what he said was already enough to bring me to my knees and make it impossible to help out justice. And he said, "Nonsense. But still hear this too. We must also go through the arguments opposed to those of which he spoke, those that praise justice and blame injustice, so that what Glaucon, in my opinion, wants will be clearer. No doubt, fathers say to their sons and exhort them, as do all those who have care of anyone, that one must be just. However, they don't praise justice by itself, but the good reputations that come from it. They exhort their charges to be just so that, as a result of the opinion, ruling offices and marriages will come to the one who seems to be just, and all the other things that Glaucon a moment ago attributed to the just man as a result of his having a good reputation. And these men tell even more of the things resulting from the opinions. For by throwing in good reputation with the gods, they can tell of an inexhaustible store of goods that they say gods give to the holy. And in this way, they join both the noble Hesiod and Homer. The former says that for the just, the gods make the oaks bear acorns on high, and bees in the middle, and the fleecy sheep heavily laden with wool, and many other very good things connected with these. And the other has pretty much the same to tell as when he says, "As for some blameless king, in fear of the gods, upholds justice, the black earth bears barley and wheat, the trees are laden with fruit, the sheep bring forth without fail, and the sea provides fish."
Okay, good, thank you. So, what do you think Adeimantus is doing that is different? Or you think it's something akin to what Glaucon had expressed just before him, but he felt the need to intervene his brother? What most needed to be said has not been said, he said. Laureen.
I think it seems like Glaucon is saying that you win favor with the gods as an unjust person because you make these sacrifices, and Adamentus seems to be saying it's kind of there's a complicity with the gods because the gods give to those, look at all the great things I've gotten, surely I must be a just person because the gods seem to think so. They've showered all these gifts on me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's different. I mean, I don't know. I guess it seemed a little bit like it just seemed like they weren't complicit in it for some reason.
Who was complicit? Sorry.
Gods
Yes.
That they'll give to those who do these good things for them.
Yes. Mary Jo.
It seemed to me that the proof is in the pudding. If someone has rewards, they must be just, and therefore there's no question about what justice is. Whatever, if you were, and this goes back to medieval times. If someone was born with a disability, they were morally considered questionable because the gods or the god wouldn't have done that to them. So there's a word for this, the appearance of whether God favors you or not. That's, I don't know if that's different from what Glaucon's saying, but he's just eliminating the question of whether the person's just or not. It's the evidence. It shows you what's right.
Jonathan, and then Mary.
Yeah, I think I'm building on what you just said, Mary Jo. It seemed to me that he was saying that Glaucon effectively had argued that you could be incredibly unjust as long as you kind of paid your public dues to the gods, and otherwise you could get away with it and it didn't matter. And what Adamentus is saying is that no, there's this intermediate or interstitial judgment called reputation, that you can't just be unjust and get away with it. You have to at least appear to be just and be publicly judged that way, whether it's by the gods or by your community. You can't just secretly get away with being unjust. There is reputation, there are consequences. And that's where I think, Mary Jo, I think that's what you're saying. There are consequences to your actions. The proof is in the pudding. And it's not about unjust or just. He's almost saying those absolutes didn't apply. What matters is the reputation you earn through your actions. And on reputation, the gods and men make judgments about justice or injustice, and therefore reward justice and penalize injustice.
Mary, you were also
I was looking at this one sentence that says, for by throwing in good reputation with the gods, they can tell of an inexhaustible store of goods that they say the gods give to the holy. And there's a suggestion there, and maybe this is what Jonathan was just saying. I'm not sure at this point, because I find this sort of confusing at a point that you can you validate your position by pointing to the gods in simple. So if Homer says, for example, that Agamemnon is the ruler and he holds the scepter of Zeus, it justifies whatever Agamemnon is doing, and it's excuse that one can give if you're in a position of power, that the gods have sort of blessed your position.
Right.
But what that has to do with justice, I'm not entirely certain. It's more of a political justification for your position.
Scott.
Yeah, maybe something similar, but maybe a little bit different from what Jonathan said. I thought the way he set this up is that the unjust person is seeming to be just, so he doesn't have to worry about the approval of the community. So, but based on our religion, he has to be worried about the approval of the gods, and so he has to provide offerings to the gods. And then his brother says, yeah, and those who are just also get benefits from the gods. And perhaps what they're saying is, you know, the reason why we believe we need to be just is because of the gods. It's not because of men, because if we have power, we can, in an unbridled way, be unjust and, you know, gain a lot of benefits. And the way you set up the situation, even more so if we don't have to worry about the opinion of the other people, but we do have to worry about the gods. But if these stories about the gods are not true, and there's no real way for us to, you know, be certain, then maybe there's no reason why a person shouldn't want to be unjust, or, you know, something along those lines.
Okay, good. Yes. So then for Adimentius, what needs to be said is that the customary manner of praising justice, which is like, even if it is injustice, you praise it, you call it justice, you give it the reputation of justice, and that leads a clever man to pursue a mere reputation, right? So he's saying we need to actually unveil that, right? And that Glaucon describes in terms of nature, right? Because it's just nature. Like, even if you're good, you have this yearning and desire to do bad things, but then you will still have the reputation of being good and just. And so for Adimentius, it's like, no, we need to unveil that. This is the customary manner of praising something which is not just, right? And so that's what needs to be said. That's why he says, well, there is something, what needs to be said has not been said. You know, that's what he is implying here, with that we need to unveil that. It's just a mere reputation of a clever man to call his acts that are even unjust and actually are establishing unjust practices, is, you know, has this mere reputation of being just, and that's wrong, right? So he's extremely dissatisfied with that, and therefore for him, like, he's looking to opinions, and that's the distinction between Glaucon and Adimentius's approach. So in one, nature becomes important; in another, it is opinion that is going to matter, right? So when he talks about and also we should discuss these quotes that he is quoting from Hesiod and Homer. But for when he says, and these men tell even more of the things resulting from the opinions, for by throwing in good reputation with the gods, they can tell of an inexhaustible store of goods that they say gods give to the holy. And in this way, they both join the noble Hesiod and Homer. Now, this is an indictment of the Greek poets and of the Greek Enlightenment, right? And he is saying, he's expressing his great dissatisfaction with the old ways, the old religion and the old masters, Homer and Hesiod, and what they said. You know, so he's condemning the whole of Greek education, and why tracing its history, the history of Greek religion, is actually, you know, beginning with Hesiod, the noble Hesiod, and the noble Homer, who spoke of the gods as rewarding justice with earthly benefits. He's not happy with that. But this is what he has learned, right? This is what the Greeks were taught. And, you know, and so in that sense, I think both Glaucon and Adimentius are somewhat similar in kind of expressing the dissatisfaction with what they inherited. You know, but they are they're really wrestling. They're wrestling with how they were taught about justice, right? And they're very puzzled.
It is hard to think of Homer as saying that justice is rewarded with earthly benefits. I'm sort of running through the Iliad and the Odyssey, searching for examples, and I guess it gets very circular because it depends on what justice is. I mean, is Odysseus going back and slaughtering the suitors? Is that a justice? I mean, is that the earthly benefit that the gods are giving him?
Good question.
Well, okay.
Yeah, it's a very good question. Yeah, what was justice for Homer? You know? Yes, Mary Jo.
Well, I keep thinking of every time they went into a city and won, they bring all these goods back, and I don't know where they put all this stuff. But coming back with booty was really important, and was that really the benefit of winning is justice, I guess.
Yeah, I think it was, you know. It was an honorable deed for them, you know, to fight a war and also to die in a war was an honor that they craved for. That's what they lived for, you know. And yes, slaughtering the enemies, getting rid of the enemies was an honorable deed. It was their duty. So yeah, that was the way of living a good life for them, for Homer. That's what Homer praises. But yeah, I don't know how I feel about this kind of depiction of Homer. I like Homer. I love Homer.
I just don't think Homer was, I mean, to me, it wasn't about justice the way any conception of justice that we think of. It was about other things, many other things, but not justice. And the only person who got close to that would have been maybe Orestes coming back and then you know, giving justice to his father by killing his mother. But that, you know, that's otherwise it's hard to see justice anywhere in those books. I mean,
yeah,
Priam, who was fabulous, dies a horrible death.
Horrible death, yes.
Patroclus, who is a good buddy, dies a horrible death. You know,
That's such a good question, that maybe justice is Plato's question. This was not Homer's question. Homer's questions were different.
Okay.
You know, how to fight a good war, how to die an honorable death, you know, and it's not his concern, really, in the same way that it is for Plato's Socrates. Scott, sorry.
Yeah,
yes.
just wanted to say that early, you know, in book 1, Plato lays out the argument, it's never just to harm someone. And that changes everything, I believe. So if you start there, it's kind of first do no harm, all of a sudden the whole story changes. Even his mythical city, which would be totalitarian, might be softer as a result of not doing any harm to anyone. But Homer doesn't have that, you know, do harm to your enemies and do help to your friends. And so if the definition of justice isn't not to do harm to anyone, then all of a sudden you'd say, well, maybe it is fair that Odysseus comes back and kills all the suitors because it's fairness, and justice is doing what's fair, you know, the sense of fairness that you know, you don't draw the line with harming.
Right, yeah. Yes, Mary Jo.
And I was thinking, what's the end game? Going to Hades. No matter if it was good or bad, it looked miserable, right? I mean, it was just degrees of misery. Was anyone happy in Hades?
Oh, who knows, you know? Hades,
Well,
yeah. Yes.
Well, you know, line 363C, they get to go to Hades, and then
yes,
they get to get drunk and
parties
and spend eternity in an eternal drunk.
Yeah.
Ooh, doesn't sound that bad.
Kathy and Rita, I thought
I'm sorry. I was just going to ask you. So, in the Odyssey and in the Iliad, are those examples of Socrates' form of justice, that it's desirable in itself and also for its rewards? Because isn't that what they're getting when they plunder, not plunder, but when, you know, when Odysseus goes and to the suitors, isn't he getting rewarded in a sense, or isn't that a sense of justice for him? So is that Socrates' view of justice, or an example of that?
No,
No?
no, that would be very Homeric, right? Socrates is trying to come up with a different definition of justice, you know. Yes, Mary?
Well, this is sort of interesting. So when you say that Homer isn't about justice, I completely agree with you. And so you would think that Glaucon or Adeimantus or one of these guys deeply, deeply versed in the poets would respond to Socrates / Plato, you know, in words or in substance. Well, that's not what this is about. You're coming up with a new concept, if that's what's going on here. But they don't address it that way. They take that argument about Homer and Hesiod very seriously.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
As if it does have something to do with justice.
I think the point there is these invocations are pointing to their dissatisfaction or about what they have been taught. So their dissatisfaction with the entire Greek tradition, right? The Greek education system that was based on learning Homer, right? They all recited the Iliad, the Odyssey. They just knew it by heart. They had memorized them, you know, and because that was the source of their moral education, right? Homer's myths were the source of their wisdom and moral education. So at this point, he's saying now at this juncture, because historically the situation has changed, politically the situation has changed. And he's saying, well, this is what I learned from my masters, Homer and Hesiod, about, you know, earthly rewards for your deeds. And it doesn't make sense anymore, right? How can be an unjust man rewarded, right? Or treated fairly, or have the reputation of being just? Like there is this contradiction, right? And so they're really trying to wrestle with that. And so that's why there is this desire at the same time of something new, right? That's why like Thrasymachus's dissatisfaction. I mean, Thrasymachus is certainly different than Glaucon and Adeimantus, but also, you know, when he was chiding Socrates for like, you just ask questions, you never give answers, right? So there is this deep yearning in these young men to just have the answer, because apparently they are the future rulers, right? And they want to know how to build their city, how to build a good city, a just city, you know? So, so there is this tension that's been brought out in the play through, you know, the invocation of the old masters, and then the expectation that they have of Socrates. Jonathan.
And is also to your point about building a city, future city, are they also talking about how to build their own moral architecture? Right? Because, okay, so it's not just the structure of a city, but in doing so, it's also the structure of my own personal architecture of my morality. Okay.
Of course, that's right. That's right. You know, that's why the whole question is, the question of the good life is about you, like how you can live a good life, but also how you can use that life to build a good life for the city.
Right.
You know, for the people of your city, for the citizens. You know, so they both go together hand in hand. And that is what is at stake here for the youth of Athens. Like, you know, how do we do that? Okay, so all right, let's read on. Mary Jo, would you like to read further? And Moses and his son.
In And Musaeus and his son give the just even headier goods than these from the gods. In their speech, they lead them into Hades and lay them down on couches. Crowning them, they prepare a symposium of the holy, and they then make them go through the rest of the time drunk, as Jonathan pointed out, the belief that the finest wage of virtue is an eternal drunk. Others extend the wages from the gods yet further than these, for they say that a holy and oath-keeping man leaves his children's children and a whole tribe behind him. So in these and like ways they extol justice, and in turn they bury the unholy and unjust in mud and Hades, and compel them to carry water in a sieve, and they bring them into bad reputation while they are still alive. Thus, those penalties that Glaucon described as the lot of the just men who are reputed to be unjust, these people say are the lot of the unjust, but they have nothing else to say. This then is the praise and blame attached to each.
Mm.
You want me to continue?
Sure, let's cover the next paragraph.
Furthermore, Socrates considers still another form of speech is about justice and injustice, spoken in prose and by poets. With one tongue, they all chant that moderation and justice are fair, but hard and full of drudgery, while intemperance and injustice are sweet and easy to acquire, and shameful only by opinion and law. They say that the unjust is for the most part more profitable than the just. And both in public and in private, they are ready and willing to call happy and to honor bad men who have wealth or some other power, and to dishonor and overlook those who happen in some way to be weak or poor, although they agree they are better than the others. But the most wonderful of all these speeches are those they give about gods and virtue. They say that the gods, after all, allot misfortune and a bad life to many good men too, and an opposite fate to opposite men. Excuse me. Beggar priests and diviners go to the doors of the rich man and persuade him that the gods have provided them with a power based on sacrifices and incantations. If he himself or his ancestors has committed some injustice, they can heal it with pleasures and feasts. And if he wishes to ruin some enemies at small expense, he will injure just and unjust alike with certain evocations and spells. They, as they say, persuade the gods to serve them. And they bring the poets forward as witnesses to all these arguments about vice, and they present it as easy, saying that vice and abundance is easy to choose, the road is smooth and it lies very near, while the gods have set sweat before virtue, and it is a long road, rough and steep.
Mm-hmm.
And they use,
yeah, this is connected to Homer too, is connected to this, so maybe we can just read this.
And they use Homer as a witness to the perversion of the gods by human beings, because he too said, the very gods can be moved by prayer too, with sacrifices and gentle vows, and the odor of burnt and drink offerings. Human beings turn them aside with their prayers when someone has transgressed and made a mistake.
Yeah, okay, very nice, thank you. Okay, so it started with Moses and his son, by the way. The noble decline, the decline of their values, as he's saying, or the steady decline, started with Moses and his son, who claimed that gods offer rewards in Hades. So you can do things, you can as we were discussing earlier, that the rewards to be had in the form of drunken parties or eternal drunk, and as so if you know that, it just, you can avenge, you can correct for your mistakes and unjust behavior by then making offerings and then getting the rewards in this way, right? And so again, there is this, it's sort of a continuation of his critique, of Plato's critique of their ancestors, of their tradition, right? Moses and his son, Hesiod and Homer, and what their teachings have taught us, they don't seem to work. They're questionable, right? So it doesn't matter what you do. You can just fix your bad deeds by praising the gods, by making offers, and you'll be rewarded. Mary Jo.
I was going to say, it sounds like indulgences in the Protestant Reformation.
Yes. Yeah, it's like, I guess there is some continuity, in history.
And they're also, can we assume, or should we assume, that you can't fool the gods with giving them, they know what's up, they just don't care.
Right. Yes. They know what's up. Yeah. They're fickle and they cannot be trusted.
So that there is no ultimate judgment from a God's perspective of what's just or unjust. They are either unwilling or incapable of calling the shot, calling one way or the other. That's not
right.
where the definition comes from, which is interesting because we keep talking about Judeo-Christian heritage. We have a very different model of where we think justice comes from or is defined.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. This is very different. The source are not the gods here of understanding justice. Yes, Mary Jo.
I was just going to say that gods are very immature. They're like children. They can be swayed. Oh, here's some candy now. Now you're my favorite person. I think they just have their own agenda and they're very fickle, as you said, but very immature.
Yeah, yes, they are like that. Those gods are like human, and humans are like those gods, They have vengeance, they have passion, they have erotic desires, they lie, they are tricksters, it's a very different conception of divinity then, and that's how they made sense of the world. That's how Homer made sense of the world, and his followers understood the world. How they were born, how Earth was created, how the stars were born. That's how they made sense of it, right? That's how they constructed that world. Laura.
Well, it seems to me then, in a way, they are taking the gods as a cue for what justice is, because the gods aren't just, and they can act unjustly or with injustice. And so I think in that sense, you're seeing what's happening here is that they're setting up all the arguments. Plato's setting up all the arguments there are right now believed about justice and injustice in the current situation in Athens, and so that we get now Socrates will enter it. This is how I'm envisioning it, but maybe I got this a little off, that he'll start to break it down. So what we're getting the setup, and I'm not sure I read that Glaucon and Adeimantus are necessarily struggling as much as they're saying, this is what's being taught to us. And tell me where I'm wrong. I want to know where I'm wrong. That's how I feel like they're doing this. They're like, okay, and I hear this from Musaeus, and we hear this from the other people. Tell me where this, and so it just feels like it's a setup.
Scott.
Yeah, just based on what Laura had said, it makes me think, when you're reading this and their arguments as they're putting them forth, Glaucon said he doesn't necessarily believe this. We know Socrates doesn't necessarily believe this. When you read it, you can't help, at least I can't help but see some of the still in the modern world, in terms of how the way the world works. You got to, but the feeling is it's not right. So there's some other standard that we all believe is justice, different from all of this. And that's what needs to be defined. It's almost like maybe it's not defined correctly because we're seeing all these situations, but that really isn't justice. There's some kind of underpinning standard that we're not getting to, and we all agree that we're not there, you know? And it's not really maybe part of this book, but you can kind of feel it like, okay, well, how can you make these arguments and then say, you know, this is the bad thing about justice? Well, no, it's not the bad thing, because you know there's some other real justice underneath all this somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Very good question. Right. What is the standard, or what is the marker by which they're going to measure what the just life is? Right. If whatever they have discussed so far, just to reject it, right, because that's what's happening, then what is it that they are striving for? And we need to get to that. You know, we're not there yet. And this is very typical of Plato's Socrates, because he just doesn't give you the definition right away, right? He's going to take you very, you know, through circuitous routes to then say, well, justice about living a good life, you know, it's knowledge, right? It has to do with practical wisdom. And then you're like, oh, okay, it's somehow anticlimactic. You know, but this is Plato's Socrates. So we are in for a long call, sort of. But that's right. That what is the ideal form? It's not articulated, but it seems like there is some, that there is one that they are striving for, or Socrates is kind of leading them. You know, he's always leading the horse to water, you know, so, right. So first we have to get through all these obstacles called tradition and history and the old religion and the old masters, so that you can articulate a new position. You know, you have to kind of get through the old in order to come to something that is new. And hence the invocation of this poetry. Because we will learn also in the Republic that Plato's making an anti-poetry argument. He hated it. He didn't think that poetry served any moral function in society. You know, and that's a view that was in opposition to many other philosophers. Aristotle is one. For Aristotle, literature and poetry were the source of wisdom, were the source of moral education, were the source of emotional intelligence. You know, that you restore and reconstitute your emotions by reading good poetry and good literature, good form of tragedy. And Plato disagreed with all of that. Yes, Mary Jo.
Was that because the poetry didn't support what he thought was justice, or is he had something against poetry and literature apart from what message it was sending? You know?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think for him, I think it really boils down to the way he understood the structures of the human soul, the role of reason and rationality. And in that, it seems like he had no space for emotions. You know, he always thought that the desires that are part of the non-rational part of the soul would always corrupt you, right? And so, whereas for Aristotle, there is space for that, because he thinks that the emotions and the passions can be trained through habituation. Plato doesn't have that. So for Plato, desires, that's why, you know, the Gyges, it's like there is this secret yearning in every person. There are these desires that can be destructive, that can destroy you and your city. And poetry is something that inculcates that. you know, you feel emotional, you feel desires when you read poetry and when you indulge in the arts. And for Plato, it's dangerous. So he would like to curb that.
So you can't be reasonable when you're being swayed emotionally.
Yes. Right, it's dangerous. You know, he doesn't trust passions. So how do you control passions and how do you control desires? Yes, Jonathan.
Yeah, I mean, not to get off on this tangent too far, but Plato's the guy behind the whole shadows on the cave walls, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I sort of like an anti-humanist. You know, I mean, we are, by his definition, we are just constant. We live in a world of distraction and false and mirrors and imperfect lenses. We're like the Xerox copy 12 copies later. You know, we're living in this failed world, separate from this higher idealized place where those ideal forms exist. It's very anti-human. I mean, in a way, I think.
Yeah. Yes, Scott.
Yeah, I agree. When I read this and read farther in, I feel like Plato is like so enamored with reason that everybody's a computer or an automaton, you know, and they're not, maybe not perfectly reasonable, but they got to become perfectly reasonable, and all the rest of it is worthless. So you just become part of the machine, a cog in the machine, and it's a totalitarian sort of machine, and it's just I don't know. At least what I've read so far, I be off the mark.
That's right. That's right. It's so. Yeah, that's why I read Aristotle, you know, because I feel, at least, you know, it's much more nuanced, and in Aristotle, there are these possibilities of transformation of the human soul, you know, that you can practice. If you practice good things, you can be a good person. With Plato, you just don't have that.
Yeah. How does he handle beauty? I mean, because I thought at one point he grapples with beauty, and I don't know that we're going to get to beauty in this or whatever else we read, but it does beg that question, unless you know, and I know this is a tangent, but that does make me wonder how he handles beauty.
Yeah, like aesthetics.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. I mean, beauty that becomes is also a form for him, you know. So what is beautiful in Plato? Yeah, I'm not sure, you know, like, because it remains very imperfect in his iterations. So yeah, I don't know, we won't get to that. So it's kind of hard without the text to get to all the complexities of the argument. But all these forms, beauty, justice, you know, even justice, you know, it's like, is there a perfect way to live a just life according to Plato? Seems very unachievable. You know, yeah, seems extreme. And so one wonders then about all of his criticism about the gods, that it seems like Plato has his own plan of creating a god that is beyond your reach, is like some very perfect ideal type, you know, that exists somewhere, you know, and that people can emulate, or, you know, maybe failingly. It remains a question mark.
And maybe even solipsistic almost, you know, he almost is Raskolnikov, or, you know, he's got his own God in a way, you know, as he's setting all this up, and it's his reason that matters, you know.
Right. Well, maybe it's, I think what we are all kind of articulating is that this book is really the articulation of Platonism. You know, it is with the Republic that Plato's system of thought comes into being. You know, and therefore he's going through all of these old masters just to show, well, now I am the new master. You know, this is my way this is my structure of thought and this is my philosophy that is actually going to be your teaching guide. All right? So this is kind of the message. And that's why he wrote the Republic. You know, it's very different from his other dialogues, because other dialogues, they deal with the same questions, but it's the Republic that becomes like a definite answer, you know, on the question of justice, and also his theories of the form, you know. So the Republic is actually an iteration, a clear iteration of his system. This is with the Republic, Platonism was born, you know, and it's in opposition, it's against everything that came before, right? So actually, Athens is going to lead a different history through the Republic, right? It's the birth of new values, a new form of thinking. Okay, so it's interesting, you know, that he has, it's like, I mean, I don't know, one can see like there's some kind of contempt for these beggar priests, of course, you know, that will help you buy your way in to like the good parts of Hades, you know, where you can be a drunk, you know, and, you know, this is too easy. Like, this is not what Plato wants, or Plato, Socrates want, you know. Yes, Jonathan.
I just, while you're talking, it just occurred to me, so Plato's really the heretic. You're not Socrates. And I read on, according to Wiki, so it has to be true, Plato died in his bed at 81 or 82 years old while a young Thracian girl played the flute to him. Now, how does he get away with this? And yes. Socrates has to drink hemlock.
Very good. That's a very good question. Yes. Well, what do you think? I'm sure you have already thought about your question, Jonathan. Do you have an answer?
I really don't. I don't understand the politics, right? I mean, could this be a situation where, unlike Socrates, Plato's writing a book, and so he's more of a Galileo figure, where his thinking is so abstract and removed from truly, you know, Socrates is out converting one-on-one, you know, sowing heresy amongst the youth. This is a book about a conversation. So is he somewhat removed from then being held accountable to the political order? That'd be my guess.
That's a good guess. Yes, that's a good place to start. Mary Jo.
Yeah, I was wondering if they'd already been regretting having executed Socrates by the time this was published, or was it even published in his lifetime? I assume it was. But also I like the theory of it being so hard to read that no one really understood what he was saying.
Yeah, well, the charge against Socrates was that he was impious, right? That he challenged the gods, and he was turning the youth into heretics. Right? They were asking them to question and really arrive at their answers through dialogue and through questioning, right? Plato did not have that charge, right? He's not charged with impiety. He's actually honored and respected for giving a new direction, creating a new religion. You know, that was not based on heresy, right? And so he becomes a different state figure than Socrates ever was. That was not Socrates' ambition. But Plato had a different ambition, right? He's like a philosopher of the city-state, right? And he's honored and respected for creating, giving values that were different and seemingly better, you know. So that's the difference, I think, between these two. So Plato is not that much of a heretic, I don't think. You know, I don't think he can take the place of Socrates. Although we learned about Socrates only through Plato, you know. So it's complicated. But anyway, we shall continue, and we can try. We can strive to finish book 2, you know, so that at least we can get to book 3. Yeah, well, if there are no more questions, we can adjourn, and we'll see
Have a
you next
wonderful week. Have a
You
great
too.
week, everyone.
Have a
Thank
great
you very
weekend.
much.
Thank
Thank you so much.